Good morning, Year 5, and welcome back. Hope you all had a lovely half term. Before we start this morning, just a reminder that things have changed slightly after half term. First of all, hopefully you downloaded your work from Teams rather than the website. If you haven't yet logged into Teams, please could you try and do so. And also, I have taken the answers to Fluent in 5 off the PowerPoint now, so I would like you to look at the video each day to check your answers. Okay. Let's have a look then, starting off with a Fluent in 5. Here it is. Give yourselves 5 minutes and come back for the answers. And here are your answers. I'm just going to run through this one. Every time we have one like that, I'm going to go through it because it's still causing a few problems. So let's have a look. 7,971 multiplied by 38. So remember, what we're doing is we're multiplying the number by 8 and then we're multiplying it by 30. So multiplying by 8 shouldn't be any problems as long as you know your 8 times table. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 7 tens is 56 tens, which is 5 hundredths and 6 tens. 8 times 9 hundredths is 72 hundredths. Add those 5 gives us 77 hundredths or 7,700. And 8 times 7 thousands is 56 thousands. Add those 7 gives us 63,000. So far we've done the 7,971 times 8. Okay, now we're going to times it by 30. Now remember last time I said, so you don't get yourself a bit tongue-tied thinking about what you're saying, we're actually going to act like we're multiplying by 3. We know it's 3 tens, and hopefully by now you've done enough multiplication that you're really happy with that place value. So we know it's 3 tens. I'm just going to say 3. Okay, and because we know it's 3 tens and not 3, we know our number's going to be 10 times bigger. So we're going to put this 0 in here now, so we already shift it all along 1 and make it 10 times bigger. Okay, so we're going to do 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 7 tens would be 21 tens. Obviously we know it's hundreds, but just for ease for now. 3 times 9 is 27. I've got 2 here, so that's 29. And 3 times 7 is 21, add 2 there, giving us 23. Okay, so just remembering that second time, I'm not necessarily saying tens and hundreds every time, just so that you don't get too confused. Now we're looking at bigger numbers. Then I add them together, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, 302,898. Okay, right, moving on then. So we are looking for the next couple of days at how we can convert from fractions to decimals and the other way around. So the good news is we've already learned all about tenths and hundredths, and those are what are going to help us turn fractions into decimals. So let's have a look at this fraction to start with then. Let's have a look at the fraction 1/5. Now, we know if we have a number in tenths, we know how to write it in decimals, because if we look at our place value grid, we've got tenths, we've got ones, we've got tenths, and we've got hundredths, okay? So we know that if we were to write the number 4 tenths, we're going to write it here and end up with 0.4. What about a fraction though? Well, at the moment, that fraction is 1/5. It would be so much easier if it was tenths, wouldn't it? Because if it was tenths, we could just use the tenths column. Well, luckily, we have to go back in time a little bit to remember, but we have done some work on equivalent fractions. We've worked out how we can change the denominator and the numerator to make a fraction that's exactly the same size. And when we did this before, we talked about remembering that whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top, and that's timesing or dividing. So how do we turn fifths into tenths? Well, if you want the denominator to go from 5 to 10, you're going to have to double it or times by 2. And so we've done it to the denominator. We now do it to the numerator. Times that by 2 gives us 2 tenths. Now it's nice and easy to put into a decimal because we know that 2 tenths is a 2 after the decimal point, or 0.2. This is another way of looking at it. This is the method we're going to use. This is almost a proof of why it works. So we've got a bar at the top here, which represents one whole, and it's been split into fifths. Okay, so it's just like a number line, and we've shaded in the first fifth. And at the bottom, we have got a number line, this time labelled in decimals, all the way up to 1. Remember, if we're comparing 1 and 1, the ones need to be the same size. And we can see there that shading 1/5 is the same as shading 0.2. Okay, let's do a little bit of practice then. So, first of all then, let's have a look at this one, 4/5. So we want to change 4/5 into tenths first, because that's how we can get a decimal nice and easily. I'm actually going to move this piece of paper off now. If you've got this, I am going to follow it, but I'm going to do the working out on the piece of paper underneath. So, 4/5, let's change it into tenths. So we want to have an equivalent fraction, and we want 10 to be our denominator. So what I've done there is I've doubled the denominator. So I also need to double the numerator. 4 times 2 is 8. So 4/5 is the same as 8/10, which means an 8 in the tenths column, a 0 there, giving me 0.8. So 4/5 is equivalent to 0.8. Right, what I would like you to do is have a go now. So I'd like you to pause the video, have a go at B through to G, and then unpause the video. I'll go through the first one in a bit more detail, and then I'll just give you the answers to the others. Okay, let's have a look then. So B was 8/20. Okay, so we need 10 to be our denominator. Okay, to get from 20 to 10, I need to divide by 2, or half the denominator. I'm going to do the same to the numerator. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 8/20 is the same as 4/10, which as a decimal we would write as 0.4. C was already in tenths for you, so you didn't have to do any converting. You could just put 0.3. E, 3/5 is the same as 6/10, so it's 0.6. 36/40 is the same as 9/10, or 0.9. And the last one was 10/20, which is 5/10, or 0.5. You might have spotted that that was half without converting it, because obviously 10 is half of 20. Okay, so just check then when you're trying to turn fractions into decimals. It's always going to be much easier if your denominator is 10 or 100, but we're going to come to that in a little while. Okay, let's go back and look at something else we might need to do. Okay, we've got a picture here. This picture is showing us a decimal or a fraction or a number, but we want to imagine that this is a whole one. This image is one whole. How many pieces are shaded out of how many altogether? Okay, hopefully you've said it's 5 out of 10 or 5/10. So the decimal represented by this image is 0.5. Okay, how might we do this as a part whole diagram then? So there's lots and lots of different ways of this. We're starting with our whole being 1, actually one whole one. How can we split it up? Well, we could. It says a mixture of fractions and decimals. So I'm going to use my knowledge of tenths, and I'm going to start with a fraction. So I'm going to put 3/10 in this part. Now, I know that 10/10 is a whole one. If I've got 3 there, how many am I going to need there? Hopefully you said 7/10, and I want this one to be a decimal, so 7/10 is 0.7. Okay, let's do another one, and then I'd like you to make sure you have a go at it. You might need to pause and write it down, or you can just call it out at the computer screen if you want to. So let's say this time we're going to start with a decimal, and we're going to put 0.4 in here. What fraction would I have to put in this bubble? Hopefully you've spotted this is 4/10. We need 10/10 altogether, because 1 equals 10/10, or 10 parts out of 10 equal parts. So I need 6/10 here. Now as a decimal, that would be 0.6. I'm going to put it as a fraction, 6/10. Okay, Let's do one more then. Let's do 0.2 here. What's going to go in my other part to make a whole one? Okay, 2/10 and 8/10 are going to make a whole one. Okay, so we've said then that it's really useful if you can get your denominator as a 10, because we know all about tenths. They're one of the columns in our place value grid. What about though if it doesn't always work like that? For example, let's look at this fraction, 1/4. Now, I know it would be really helpful if I could change it into tenths, because I know all about my tenths column. So, okay then, I need to make 10 my denominator. Oh, now I'm going to have a problem, because 4 is not a factor of 10. I can't multiply 4 by a whole number to get 10. It doesn't appear in the 4 times table. So it's not going to work this time. However, we do have a tenths column. We also have a hundredths column. So how about we try to change our denominator this time to 100? 4 times what is 100? If you're not sure, remember 100 divided by 4 is the same as halving, and halving again. Half of 100 is 50, half of 50 is 25. So we are multiplying 4 by 25 to get 100. We have to do the same to the numerator, which will give us 25 hundredths. And hopefully you remember from last week that this would be the same as, well, let's do it down here actually. This would be the same as 20 hundredths and 5 hundredths. And we know that 20 hundredths is the same, is the same as 2/10 and 5 hundredths. And then we put them back together to have 2/10 and 5 hundredths. Okay, so that is equal to 0.25 as a decimal. It's difficult, isn't it? Because actually we're so used to the numbers appearing in the answer. There isn't a 4 anywhere here, but it is 0.25. I'm just going to show you what that would look like visually as well. So here is that number line again and that bar model. So we've got quarters here. It's split into quarters. 1/4, if you transfer down to the number line, would take us exactly between 0.2 and 0.3, which we know would be 0.25. And you can also see here that a half is equivalent or equal to 0.5, and 3/4 is equivalent to this number. It's exactly halfway between 0.7 and 0.8, so it's 0.75. Okay, so let's practice now then converting the decimals using 100 as our denominator. So this is the sheet you've got at home. I'm just going to move it out the way so I've got space to work. So the first one we've got is 7/25. So you can see straight away, can't you, how we're not going to be able to change that so that the denominator is 10. But we now know we can change it so the denominator is 100. So 25 times 4 is 100. We'll do the same to the numerator. 7 times 4 is 28, and 28 hundredths is 0.28. Remember, that's 2/10 and 8 hundredths. So we could, of course, this isn't a fraction in its simplest form. This is the simplest form here, but this is a time when we don't want it to be simple form. We want 100 to be our denominator. Right, next one then, 31/50. Okay, so 50 times 2 is 100, and 31 times 2 is 62. So that becomes 62 hundredths, or 6/10 and 2 hundredths. Okay, what I would like you to do is pause and have a go at C, D, E and F, and then unpause, where I will quickly go through the answers and we'll move on to the next bit. Okay, so C then, 13/20. So it would be tempting to think, oh, I could just half that and become 10. But But if you half 13, you end up with 6.5, and we don't ever have a decimal in a fraction or a fraction on a fraction. Okay, so we're going to stick with 100. 20 times 5 is 100. 13 times 5 is 65, which gives us 0.65. Let's have a look at D. 10/25. Again, we're timesing by 4, which gives us 40 hundredths. Now, I know that 40 hundredths is the same as 4/10, so it's 0.4. You could, of course, put 0.40, but that 0 isn't adding anything, so you don't need it there. E, 186 200ths. So we're going the other way this time. We're dividing rather than multiplying. Dividing by 2, same to the numerator. So we end up with 93 hundredths, or 0.93. And then the last one is 1/20th. And maybe you've spotted why I put this one in. So we're multiplying by 5, which will give us 5 hundredths. Just wanted to make sure you didn't put the answer as 0.5. Of course, that would be 50 hundredths. 0.05 was hopefully the answer you came up with. If you did get 0.5, just remember it's 5 hundredths, so that 5 goes in the hundredths column. Okay, last little bit then, it's another part-whole diagram. So same thing as last time, but now we're going to do hundredths. So let's imagine that I had 17 hundredths here. How many hundredths would I need to make up to a whole one? Well, 100 take away 17 is 83. So I would have 83 hundredths here. Obviously, as a fraction, that would look like that. I would like it as a decimal, so 0.83. Okay, your turn. Let's see if you can do one now. So I'm going to have 38 hundredths here. What decimal would I have in this box? Okay, 38 hundredths. I would need 62 more to get a whole one, so it's 0.62. And let's do one the other way round then. Let's have 0.84. What fraction would you have in this box? Okay, 84 hundredths there. We need 16 more to make 100 hundredths, or a whole one. So you could have put 16 hundredths there. You might have simplified that fraction and ended up with 8/50ths, or you could have simplified it even more and ended up with 4/25ths. All of those are correct answers because they're all equivalent fractions. Okay, over to you then. Your task today is similar. It's just practicing the things we've gone through in today's introduction. So you've got a few activities where you need to use 10 as your denominator to help you turn into decimals. A little bit of reasoning here. And finally, you've got a little bit of using hundredths to find the decimal and another little bit of reasoning there at the end. I will come back tomorrow with your answers.